came across Sylvia's work when she was working here on a Fulbright scholarship a while ago. And now there is a publication on the results of that study trip, fieldwork, analysis, networking, all kinds of things. Yeah. And there was a publishing event for that like on Tuesday. And now we thought that, of course, we will be visiting many of the same themes, but now we will concentrate on the methods of co-research, collaboration, co-creation. There's lots of terms that we will be using today. And this keynote is part of the INEQ talks and then of the Obama project, Overcoming Barriers to Participation, that started a year ago. And Sylvia is also on the advisory board of that project. And we hope to continue collaborations in the future. And hello also everyone who's joining us remotely. There's plenty of people in the Zoom. If you have comments, thoughts, questions, please write on the chat. And Kinza here on our side will take care of the chat, and then there will be later time for addressing those questions. For everyone else, this is like it's a big room and it's a bit pompous in the sense that we sit with these big tables, but we'd like to keep this as a discussion. So I will be interrupting Sylvia. She said that she will not be offended by that.
Welcome.
Yeah.
I will also be asking for participation.
Exactly. So that applies to you as well. So just raise your hand if you've got something to say, and then, we move like that. So this is not like a keynote that we would have the structure and everything ready.
Yeah.
So Sylvia is the Executive Director of Bonner Center for Civic Engagement at the University of Richmond and has been hosted here by Diakonissaliitos, the Deaconess Institute, for the work. And Deaconess Institute is also a partner in the Obama project, our interaction partner, and we will be continuing on many of these themes on the next 5 years of the Obama project. And I think you can tell more about yourself, and we will be interrupting and bothering you for next 45 minutes. And then we will have 2 discussants here, Jasmin Rajamaa from Deaconess Foundation, Mervi Issakainen, who's also part of the Obama project. So, please. Now you move. So we don't use chairs.
Stop already.
And then for the discussants, we take one more step.
I sit here. Okay.
You sit here and I take my
Slides.
It's the arrows for the slides.
Oh.
So
Great.
please.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for coming online and in person. I'm really impressed with your interest. I know how many places there are to be and things to do every day. So it is meaningful to me that you chose this. And I am counting on you because this is a conversation. And of all of the talks, there have been a lot this week. I've been most curious, maybe a little nervous about this one. And I think that tells me that these ideas are still working themselves out for me. And so in that spirit, I bring them to you to improve and expand and extend and apply. And so this is not a canned, scripted situation, but I do have some slides to help us through the ideas and some places where I'm really going to turn to you to ask for information. So, and you can interrupt at any point, as like I said. Okay, so first of all, there's a little delay maybe.
It was working just when I tried it. Yes.
There we go. Okay. This is just the most boring slide that I'll show you. These are the credentials that Pekka was referring to, but it's just a reminder of why I'm back in Finland. I was here in 2023 for the project referenced here, Fulbright Finland Mid-Career Professional Development Grant, and hosted by both the Deaconess Foundation, which was my primary host, and Tampere University, where I did some co-teaching. And both of those were really fruitful. The project here resulted in this publication that I was just back here to celebrate. And so I want to share a little bit about where I'm coming from, just very cursory, and that might help our conversation, you understanding my context. So this is Richmond, Virginia, 2 hours south of Washington, DC. That's the James River. It is the river city, although we know there are many more. But this is actually my home base professionally. This is the University of Richmond, close into us, showing the distance from the city. So, like so many American cities, Richmond is a bit sprawling. So we are in the city. We vote in the city, but there is all this space between us and what you would recognize as an urban environment. It takes about 15 minutes to drive there. So you can bike, I do, but lots of people think it's far away. And this is my home base, the Bonner Center for Civic Engagement. And this is a kind of infrastructure that I don't think exists exactly parallel here. So I just wanted to pause on it. Many universities and colleges have something like this. Ours is particularly well resourced. Yeah.
I tried to get this
Out of the Sure, thank you. So this is just our mission statement. And so really, very simply, we exist to connect the learning that is happening on campus with the social change efforts that are happening in our region. And we do that in a lot of different ways, through classes, through volunteering, through collaborative long-term projects. No matter what, no matter the mode, I think the method is implied here. That last part of the mission is our most important value, that we are doing this in ways that value the knowledge and potential in our communities, on campus, off campus. So seeking to create collaborative, co-creative spaces. So I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment, but
Is it again the same
It's again-
thing? Yeah, okay.
maybe there's a better way to
I think it just needs to be,
just
yeah.
with more
Activated or something. I don't know what's the word. Yeah.
This is just a visual representation of that value, that philosophy that I was just sharing. This is what we used last year to celebrate our 20th anniversary, and that theory of change that is suggested above the campus and the city meeting visually there. Because of course, everything we do is to bridge that space that you saw in the image. We spend a lot of money on transportation necessarily because there is one bus that comes 5 times a day to campus. That is not enough. So we supplement that. But Connect, Act, Imagine with RVA, Richmond, Virginia. This is our theory of change in a nutshell. That it is when we connect as equals in the work we are doing, when we act together towards a common purpose, a shared goal, whether grand or small, then we really activate our collective capacity to imagine a better city, a better university, a better shared world. And so that's what we're striving for.
Yeah, and I think it's been on the urban geography that we've been discussing so much, and that's one of, for me at least, has been one of the most interesting things, that how the cities are structured and what's the distance. And yes.
And so I should have said, the University of Richmond is a fairly small college. So it is university because we have a couple of professional programs there. Mostly it's a small liberal arts college. Classic American liberal arts college, you would recognize it. The founders went up to New England and they said, ooh, we like those bricks and we like that ivy. And they came down south and they built the same thing. So it's like straight out of a movie set. But there are about 3,500 undergraduates. So it's pretty small. About 30% of those are majoring in business. That's the state of higher education in America. And we work with all departments, all majors. So it's not about you have a particular subject of study that gets you into. This is really work that we're inviting the whole campus into. So this is just, if you're curious about the project results from that time in Finland, where I was really spending time immersed in the D stations, the DSMs that Deaconess Foundation runs. That's a link to the publication. And moving on to the invitation that Pekka gave me was not to repeat my talk about the findings, but to talk about the methods. And I have to go back a bit. I have to go back to some more fundamental philosophical questions. And so that's where I want to start with you. These questions, I think, made it into the talk description. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So full disclosure, I don't know who wrote these questions. So in 2020, maybe like you, I was an avid lifelong learner, watching so many Zoom learning seminars, so many things were happening in our country and our world at that time. And it was so easy to just click in and hear really smart people talking about them. And so I did that a lot. And that was how I was introduced to this idea that I want to explore with you about epistemic injustice or epistemic justice. And at some point in that seminar, which, I did a really bad job with my notes. I didn't write down the names of the people. I barely wrote down the date, but I wrote down these questions. And as I was looking back recently, they really struck me as important questions, kind of fundamental questions for us to ask, especially from the position of the university. And so I want to do something with you that is not rhetorical, as in we're actually going to answer a little bit of a thing here. But this is going to be a warm-up, low stakes, just with one person that you're sitting next to. So I'm going to ask you to think about your own life experience. Think about, for those of you on Zoom, you can do this as individual reflection. Think about an early time when you recall learning something. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be the first thing. That's always a lot of pressure. Just an early time when you recall learning something new, something you remember that moment. What did you learn? How did you learn it? Who taught you that thing? And what happened next? So here's what I'm going for here. Coming again from the US higher education system is my perspective. I have tried to learn about the Finnish system. I know it's quite different, but I think that there may be some common threads here. So US academic institutions are built around a very limited kind of knowledge that is valued, that is encouraged, that is rewarded. And this has really profound implications for what we know as academic communities, what we know outside academic communities, and also how we can work to advance the public good. So I want to explore that a little bit. What I mean is, when I say we, in universities and communities working together, this is the work that I'm trying to support with many others. And many of you are invested in work like this too. This limited conception of what kind of knowledge is credible, valuable, reputable, really undermines our core purposes. And it can do so even when we're using language that makes it sound very collaborative.
And this is very, very interesting group here, that there's practitioners, then there's scholars from MA level to full professors, and
Perfect.
Lots of different disciplines as well. I don't know everyone, but I know quite many
people
here.
And I think that the observations I'm going to make now could apply to other kinds of institutions as well. I've had some conversations with colleagues at the Deaconess Foundation. Any large bureaucracy is going to have some of these problems. So, but a little bit more about the context I'm drawing on, specifically the history of the American Research University, which was founded in some ways in response to, but definitely as a counterbalance to, an expansion of the elite serving colonial colleges in the United States. So all the ones that were founded before we became a country. And were explicitly intended to strengthen social hierarchies by training white, wealthy, male ministers, lawyers, and professors. That was the only thing you would study in college. If you went to Yale, that was the reason. And no one else was invited, and no other subject of study was available. So in comparison to that, US research universities, which were founded mostly in the 1860s and 90s because there was an act of Congress that said it should be so, they were founded really with the goal of strengthening democracy, training the sons and eventually daughters of farmers and workers. And so that's a really different purpose. I don't work in a research university, but as research universities go, so goes the rest of higher education, at least in the US. And I doubt there is a college in the United States that doesn't have its public purpose stated very clearly in its mission statement. Ours certainly does. That's the University of Richmond's mission statement. So back to my argument in formation here, despite these public serving aspirations like that at our college, a very constrained, narrow, limited understanding of knowledge is a key factor in limiting our ability to do that, our success at preparing students for life of purpose and responsible leadership. And there are lots of other factors as well, like the university as a corporation. These are related, but I really want to focus on this idea of knowledge. So I want to tell two stories here that will helpfully illustrate the problem that I'm talking about, this narrow understanding that I'm referring to. So the first story was given to me by someone else, and the second story is my own experience. So the first story, imagine graduate seminar in religious studies at UCLA, so University of California, LA, meets 1 week off campus at a local church. The professor has arranged for the class to have a tour and a discussion with the church's religious leader, and then to retreat to a meeting room in the church basement where the class can finish off its discussion for the day so they don't have to waste time getting back to university. The tour is lively and informative. The leader explains the church's beliefs and practices, then escorts them to the meeting room, closes the door, and leaves. And when the door closes behind him, the professor turns to the class. His body language changes, and he says, in almost a conspiratorial tone, "Well, we really think." So that story was told to me by a mentor in graduate school. Second story. This is from my own experience. Many, many years ago, when I was a graduate student at UT Austin, another large public research university, I attended a week-long summer institute run by a key disciplinary association. My field is rhetoric. Over the week, my cohort of graduate students met a series of distinguished scholars who talked with us about their current work. It was very exciting. They were also encouraging us in our work. And one afternoon, we were joined by the author of a recently published book on the rhetorical power of American landscapes, who discussed with us excerpts of his work on Yellowstone National Park. I can't remember much about his argument, except that it was absolutely brilliant, like the kind of thing that you just can't believe someone has pulled off. And mostly because of its totality and specificity. Like he had read the entire park and every part of it was working for his argument. He read every trail, every sign, every road, every building. He had spent so much time in the park. It seemed, I can't remember anything about the arguments, I won't even pretend. But what I do remember is he had clearly spent time developing relationships with the park staff and probing the park's identity, which of course was sort of different than how the park was actually being presented. There was a story, and then there was the way he was reading the landscape. So when his talk was over, I was the first one to raise my hand, and I asked him what seemed like a totally softball question, but what I really wondered: what was the park staff's reaction to your analysis? What did they think? about your reading of the park. And the question seemed to surprise him and actually annoy him. And he said, I didn't share that with them. Why would I? So that was a moment when I knew I'm not going to be a tenure track professor. I'm not invested in that. Ideas for ideas' sake. That he had no interest in whether these ideas would matter to people committed to the sustainability of the park. So these stories put together tell us something, I think, about the problem of the isolated role of the scholar. And the problem when we think about the scholar as there to critique, there needs to be some distance from the thing that we're critiquing, and especially from the people who know that thing best. We can't have the conversation with the church leader in the room, and we can't say what we really think to the park staff. We have to be separate. And I think there's also implied in both stories a sense that whatever the knowledge is that those experts have who are living the experience of the places is somehow subordinated, somehow lesser than, not quite as important as what we're going to say now that the door is closed and we can really talk about it, or what I'm going to say in my book. So I'm guessing that most of us here, react quickly to the flaws of that way of thinking. And maybe it even seems like a caricature, like something we've moved beyond. We don't identify that way. We don't think of ourselves as wanting to be separate. We have research methods that I know many of you are engaged in that explicitly embrace lived experience and include community members as co-researchers. And I love this, I can't say it in Finnish, but in Finland, we even have experts by experience. I love that category. We don't have anything like that in the US. And we have large scale, ambitious ways of thinking about co-research, like the Obama Project. And I do think Finland is way ahead of the US in terms of prioritizing those methods. I want to return to that when we converse. But as a university administrator, which is really my primary identity, and a program builder committed to developing places for civic learning and action, I'm really aware of all the ways that a hierarchy of knowledge still prevails, even in our most ambitious moments. So I just want to share an example of our most ambitious moment. This is one of the things that we're most proud of in our center. This is now entering its 9th year collaboration between faculty at our university, faculty at the neighboring research university, and volunteer organizations that are mostly led by descendants of those buried in Richmond's historic African American cemeteries. I won't go into all of the things, but you can imagine the legacies of segregation that persist on the landscape of our city. And so Black people could not be buried in white cemeteries. White cemeteries were historically well cared for, pristinely preserved. African American cemeteries flourished under decay. There wasn't the same kind of resources to preserve them, and individual families couldn't do it. So this is an effort absolutely born out of collaboration to pool the knowledges, and there's expertise in biology, geography, sociology. There's so much university expertise, and then the expertise that the families are bringing. Who is buried there? Where are the graves? What are the stories that now can be told? And now there's a really beautiful digital map that is becoming an archive for these communities to build together. So I think that's a good, powerful example. But every day we face the problem of hierarchy in this community. Things like, well, the faculty are getting some rewards for participating in this. What are the community members getting? When we go to present in academic spaces, is it only the faculty who go? Do the community participants have a stake in that kind of presentation? There's all kinds of questions about whose knowledge is valued, and some beautiful ways that the group is trying to work that out. So I want to I'm going to skip that and go to because I see our time.
We can go a little bit over time
okay.
because then we have 5 minutes for discussion.
Perfect. But I want to go to this concept that's helping us work on these ideas. And I'm not a philosopher, but I want to draw on some thinking from British philosopher Miranda Fricker, who is now on faculty at NYU in New York. And in 2007, she wrote a book that I'm drawing on here called Epistemic Injustice, Power and the Ethics of Knowing. And some ideas from that book have made their way into my field, which is shared with many others, of civic engagement in higher education. And specifically, the idea that harms done to people in their capacity of knowers are a type of harm that we really need to pay attention to. And I'm really moved by a reflection from Miranda Fricker 10 years after publishing that book. She wrote this about why it seemed important to name this kind of injustice. What was needed, I believed, was something much more easily recognizable as making sense of the lived experience of injustice and how a person's beliefs, reasons, and social interpretations were received by others. Even if their intentions were good, there can be great harm when we discredit the knower. And so she was really committed to naming this. I think an important thing here is the idea that even if it's not deliberate, there's culpability, there's responsibility. So we may dismiss someone or something without even realizing we're doing it. We may do it in an instant with our body language, but there's responsibility for having caused that harm. So what does this mean when we come back to this question of universities, professionals and scholars who want to cultivate civic participation? Well, I want to offer a couple of things. First of all, simply naming this injustice has been useful for us. It's a daily, it's an hourly, it could even be an every minute kind of experience for some people to have, especially when they are interacting with university communities. And so thinking about this helps us to start our work from the experience of the marginalized, to think about the possibility for that kind of injustice. So for example, if we're having a university seminar that looks like this, and we want to invite a community expert into the room, what are we doing to establish a community that is welcoming, to establish a place of mutual respect? No assumptions can be made that will be the experience of the person coming in. So those are the kinds of things that help us think on a practical level about how we recognize the potential for this kind of harm. And this is a justice issue. People have the right to be seen, to be heard, for their perspectives and experiences to be valued. And so it's not trivial. But second, I think this concept helps us focus on the concrete experiences of people, individuals relating to one another, reacting to one another. In other words, it focuses on the relations of power that are always present. And so even though I just said, we have this fantastic collaboration and I'm very proud of it, it really comes down to what happens in the meetings, what happens at the cemeteries. What are the faculty, what are the students, what are the community members actually experiencing together? And sometimes that's quite different than the nice picture and the nice story. And so to focus on that power relationship is to bring into view potentially all the microaggressions, all the mini injustices that instantiate more structural forms of power. And you can't right that kind of wrong just by adding more quote unquote marginalized people to a research team. Like there has to be a lot more structural intention. And third, I think this matters because if we can get this right, and I know we do sometimes, then we really are on the path towards deeper, richer knowledge creation. Because when we can entertain truly all forms and sources of knowledge, what we create is that much better. And I know that we know this viscerally. So these are the questions I want to explore with you, but I'm going to share one other thing before I do. I want to explore with you what could achieving epistemic justice for all participants look like for professionals, including scholars, but not limited to, invested in civic participation? What does it actually require of us? What does it require of our institutions? What are we already doing that feels right? And what gets in our way? And what can we do about those things that get in our way? So before we go there, I want to share one other idea that I'm finding really useful, which is kind of a potential set of solutions-ish. So there's a lot of words on the screen, so let me pause and break this down. This is coming from Ira Harkavy. Ira Harkavy is at the University of Pennsylvania, and he runs a center kind of like the center that we have at the University of Richmond, but it's more focused on university and school partnerships specifically, but very, very deep work in the school systems right around the University of Pennsylvania campus in West Philadelphia, which is a neighborhood that has faced a lot of challenges for a long time. So there's a lot in the context of the US, and Ira cites some studies that I probably don't need to cite because I think it's common sense that we know that universities are falling short of their public purposes. So we know that very well. In that context, what he is saying is that we need a different kind of identity for the university, and one that really prioritizes this kind of attentiveness to our specific communities. And so what he calls this is a democratic civic university. This is his proposal. This is what we need to think about the university this way. And I want to read this to just dwell a little bit in this language, and then we'll put it alongside the epistemic justice idea. So a democratic civic university would involve significant and ongoing engagement of an institution's comprehensive assets. So yes, academic, but also economic, cultural, human, in partnership with community members to produce knowledge and educate students with the ability to help create and maintain just, anti-racist, democratic societies. And then this next part, I think we can't pause on long enough. Importantly, a democratic civic university would infuse democracy across all aspects of the institution. So what he's saying is, it's not just about how the institution behaves when it's doing its research, when it's doing its teaching out in quote unquote the community. Every part of the university needs to be defined by this goal of creating a culture of participatory democracy. So how do we do that? He has a couple of ideas. In his words, these are 3 things that universities should do, and he's talking about research universities specifically. First of all, focus on place-based local work, where the university is. And of course, the second, develop an inclusive approach that involves the knowledge held in those communities being central. And so involving community members in defining the problems, sustaining that involvement through implementation. Of course, participatory action research is a very clear method that fits there. It's establishing a community of experts. And third, probably the most radical in the traditional university is this third one: make democratic implementation the process and goal of research. So the idea that ideas for ideas' sake, it's not time for that. Continuous integration of theory and practice in the course of place-based problem solving. I think this is the Obama model, actually. So I appreciate these ideas. I think he's onto something. But I also think on their own, they don't sufficiently account for how hard it is to realize epistemic justice, to really tend to those power relationships. So number 2 sounds great, but the mechanics of how we do it are significant. And that brings us back, I think, to these questions that I wanted to focus on. how do we really create communities of experts that effectively disrupt those limiting hierarchies of knowledge that prevent us from hearing, seeing, valuing multiple forms of knowledge as credible? What are we already doing? How do we take those innovations to the next structural level? Because we can have a really nice project, but the university can still behave as the university has always behaved. And then we have not really influenced the future of our common good to the extent that we could. So I want to stop. The one thing I didn't do, which I promised to do in my title, was talk about the work in the Deaconess Foundation as an example. And I think I'll leave that. I'm sure we'll come back to it, but I want to not get too far away from these questions.
Yeah, and we've got Yasmin who will be
Yes.
talking about that soon, so in that sense as
Yes.
well. Wow, this was wonderful. Let's give a round of applause.